In this one we'll be talking about something which is known as the CSS Box Model, which is basically how CSS treats these elements and how to actually style them, right? So there is one particular model which is known as the box model, and that is what we need to keep in mind when we are styling all the elements, right? So we'll try understanding the box model with this particular example here. So we have one heading and we have a paragraph in here. So right now the website looks like this. So let me quickly add the three most important things which are a part of the box model, after which I'll explain you exactly what I'm doing. Okay, so now since we have to add a CSS rule, we write the name of the element here followed by the curly braces, and in here the first thing which we'll be mentioning is the border, right? So the border is basically a line which surrounds the element, right, and on all the four sides. So first here we need to mention the thickness of the border, which I'll be writing as 3 pixels for now, followed by which we need to mention the type of border which we want. For example, if we say solid, we get a continuous line. If we say dashed, we get a dashed line. Similarly, if you say dotted, you get a dotted line. Right now I am keeping it solid. After solid, we need to mention which color we want the border to be. For example, right now I want it to be blue, so I'll put blue there. Now when we refresh this, we get this blue solid continuous border available surrounding our heading. If instead of solid I put dashed here, you will see that we get this dashed border here. Similarly, you can try all the other options. Now the second important thing is something known as padding. Padding basically is the space between our content and our border here. Okay, so now when we quickly add, let me say 20 pixels. So basically this means that 20 pixels on all the four sides, right? So now when we refresh this, we see that the content and the border spread out, or basically there is a 20 pixel gap between the content and the border on all the four sides. Since there is nothing here on this side, so the space is extending, right? So this is what padding is. The third most important part of the box model is known as margin. Margin is basically the space between two different elements. Okay, so for example, if I say margin of 50 pixels now and refresh this, we'll observe that there is a space between the heading element and the paragraph element and also the body element, right? So since everything comes inside the body, you see that there is a margin with the body element as well, right? So that is what the box model is all about. We have our content here, we have the padding, which is basically the space between the content and the border, after which we have the border which surrounds the content or the element, and after that we have the margin, which is the space between two different elements. So what I'm going to do is I'll quickly copy this style for the paragraph element as well, so that we get to see a clear distinction between everything. So let me make this one solid and I'll change the color to say green. I'll increase the padding to 50 pixels here and I'll reduce the margin to say 30 pixels, right? So now when we refresh this, we get a clear-cut distinction between two different elements here. This is the heading, or this is the content, followed by the padding, the border and the margin, right? Similarly, the content, the padding, followed by the border and the margin. So the spacing between these two elements is a sum of both the margins, right? So 30 plus 50 is 80 pixels, and that is what the difference between these two elements actually is. What we did here was we did not add border to all the, we had one common border for all the sides. Similarly, a common padding and a common margin. However, if we want to distinguish individually, as in we want the top to be of a particular border style and the left side of another style or something, same goes for the padding as well. If you want a different value for the top padding and a different one for the bottom one, what we can actually do is we can segregate this as border top, and similarly for all the four things, right? So border top could be one, border left, border right and border bottom. That are the four options which we can use, and we can apply individual styles to all the four options, right? So this is what it looks like. Let me quickly make it this one dotted. I'll make this one solid and I'll probably change the color to red and black and say purple. right? So now when we see, we get 4 different border styles. The left one is dotted, the top one is dash, the bottom one is dash, and the right one is solid, right? So basically that is how you apply different styles to the 4 different positions or 4 different locations of the border. Now moving on to padding. Similarly, we can have padding for the left side, padding for the right side, padding for the top, and padding for the bottom. So let me quickly give you an example. Top and bottom here. So I'll just reduce the size to 10, I'll increase this to 100, and I'll leave it to 20. Right, so now when we refresh it, we'll see that the distance is different on all the 4 sides based on the values which we have given, and same applies for the margin as well. We can have margin top, left, right, and bottom, which basically will distinguish the difference between or the spacing between the elements on all the 4 sides. Right now you see we have a common spacing on the left and right because it is with the body. On the top we have a little more spacing because the margins of both are included there. So margin bottom is actually irrelevant in this particular scenario because there is a lot of empty space here, so that will not actually matter. However, you can set it so when you add more elements later on, that will come into effect. And we have right, so maybe I'll change left and right to 0 pixels, and I leave the top and bottom to 30. So when we refresh this, we actually see that there is still a little amount of space on both the sides, and that is because of the margin of the body. So if we want the element to actually stick to both the sides without leaving any space, we need to style the body's margin to 0 pixels. And once we save this, we see that the border actually sticks to the corners, and that is how you apply margin to all the 4 possible sides. Similarly, we have the border for 4 different sides, and we have the padding for 4 different sides, right? So that is what the box model is all about, and that is the most important thing which we need to understand when it comes to styling the elements, because that is how CSS actually deals with elements. So when we are about to style those elements, we need to understand that they are distinguished based on these 3 parameters: border, margin, and padding. To repeat it quickly, we have the content here followed by the padding, which is the space between the content and the border. Then we have the border. After the border, we have the margin, which is the space between 2 different elements, right? So that is what the box model is all about. I hope you guys have understood this.